Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Trees Are the Answer, the Role of a Healthy Urban Canopy in an Urban Watershed. My name is Elena Berg, and I am a planner with the Environment and Development Department of the North Central Texas Council of Governments, or NCT-COG. To give a brief overview of who we are, NCT-COG is a voluntary association of local governments. We are one of 24 councils of government in Texas, and our main function is to transcend jurisdictional boundaries to promote sound development and facilitate cooperation among our member governments. As part of our water quality management planning work, we host webinars and/or workshops on water quality topics. If you have any ideas for future topics for these workshops or webinars, please feel free to send them to me. And now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mac Martin, a water resources forester for the Texas A&M Forest Services based out of Houston. His job focuses on nature-based solutions and urban best management practices to promote water quality, stormwater reduction, flood mitigation, green infrastructure, and water quantity across 21 counties in Southeast Texas. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Forest Resources with a certificate in Forest Water Resources from the University of Georgia. And Mac, we will now turn controls over to you and you may begin. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Elena. Hi, everyone. As Elena said, my name is Mac Martin. I'm a water resources forester with the Texas A&M Forest Service based out of Houston. And while I'll be the one giving the presentation, on screen is the contact information for Courtney Blevins and Mike Sills, two members of our urban forestry team who are local in the DFW area. Their information will be at the end of the presentation as well. Courtney is a community forester in Fort Worth, and Mike is a regional urban forester based out of Plano. And I just encourage you guys to reach out to them for any local urban forestry endeavors in the future. But without further ado, this is the role of forests and trees in urban watershed management. So the relationship between forest and water has been long established. Going all the way back to the Organic Act of 1897, it states that a public or national forest can only be created for one of three fundamental reasons, and those are improving and protecting the forest, furnishing a continuous supply of timber, and securing favorable conditions of water flows. In fact, many state forests across the country were established specifically for watershed protection. This is a diagram of the forest and water cycle in a traditional forest setting. It still operates as the water cycle we're all familiar with evaporation, condensation, and precipitation, with the obvious addition of this forest in the middle. We'll run through each of these terms quickly, starting with interception. Interception is exactly what it sounds like. It's when the tree's canopy or its leaves and branches get in the way or intercept rainfall from reaching the ground. The tree will hold on to a portion of this rainfall for its own use, never allowing it to reach the ground and become part of surface runoff. And when the tree is done with the water, it will evapotranspirate back into the clouds. Evapotranspiration is just a process of evaporation not from a water body source, and in this case, it will evapotranspirate out of the tree's leaves. A byproduct of interception is that the portion of rainfall that was not intercepted into the tree is greatly slowed down on its way to the ground. When large, heavy rain droplets hit the topsoil unimpeded, they can cause a lot of disturbance moving sediments and helping to speed up erosion. When the rain is slowed down, it allows for a greater amount of infiltration. This is when the rainfall seeps into the ground, and forest floors are already very conducive to infiltration. The interconnected root system of the trees, organic matter, and fungal mycorrhizae help make forest floors extremely porous. And getting the rainfall to infiltrate is very important because the soil is the workhorse of the natural water cleaning process. And once that water infiltrates in the ground, it doesn't move straight down, but rather it moves both downward and horizontally along permeable layers. So from here, one of three things will happen. The first is a portion of water will remain as soil water storage, and this is generally a reserve of water for your understory species to use. The next is the water may percolate down into the groundwater table, facilitating groundwater recharge. And lastly, the water will become part of the subsurface or base flow. This is a delayed groundwater flow that provides water to rivers and streams to keep water flowing in your drier and drought-like months. Subsurface flow is critical because it's where the majority of the water purification process takes place. And as the water moves through the ground, the rock and soil underneath act as a natural filter. Pollutants are filtered, attached to soil particles, or eaten by microbes as the water passes through the soil, only allowing very clean water to enter into your water body. And with a portion of this rainfall being intercepted and the high rate of infiltration, forest land uses allow for the smallest amount of surface runoff to erode soils and bring pollutants into your water body. Urban environments all have similar general characteristics. As urbanization increases, you see a decrease in tree canopy, vegetative ground cover. These are like your grass layers, and also your permeable topsoil. These are removed for impervious surfaces, things like roofs, asphalt, concrete, severely compacted soil, basically any surface water can't infiltrate into. As land loses its ability to absorb rainfall, we see a significant increase in surface runoff. It's also important to note that surface water quality will be much lower and flood risk will be much higher in these areas. This is due to the increased impervious surfaces, but also the storm drain infrastructure in residential and urban land uses. Storm drains are pipes that rapidly move stormwater off the streets and roads, unfiltered into rivers and streams. Impervious surfaces provide runways to increase the speed of runoff, allowing more pollution to be picked up. So think of how in a large rain event, when water runs unimpeded off your roof, out your gutter, down your driveway, and joins a larger flow of runoff in the streets, it's picking up more and more speed all the while, and that runoff is taken rapidly down a storm drain, carrying it with it physical debris and other pollution as it enters into the water body much faster than the natural drainage process. So these are all the negative impacts of increasing surface runoff. The official term for the polluted surface runoff we've been talking about is called non-point source pollution. This is when the source of pollution in your water can't be identified because it's coming from runoff over an entire landscape area. And types of non-point source pollution is dependent on the type of land use. Excess fertilizers and herbicides are common in residential areas, while bacteria, nutrients from pet waste, and faulty septic systems are more common in urban areas. For increased frequency and severity of flooding, the two key elements to flooding are rainfall intensity and duration. Intensity is the rate of rainfall, and duration is how long that rain lasts. All rivers and streams move water at their natural flow. So in a large rain event, when you get a lot of surface runoff, the speed of that runoff increases as your intensity and duration increase. The more speed the runoff picks up, the more erosion it can cause and pollution it can carry into the water body. So when the runoff reaches its top speed, it's called a peak flow. Now, peak flows occur in all rain events, but in a major rain event, the velocity of the peak flow can surpass the natural flow of the stream. So as that peak flow enters the stream faster than the natural flow, water levels rise and eventually flooding occurs. Trees help slow down runoff and allow for more infiltration, decreasing frequency and severity of flooding, while also facilitating groundwater recharge, increasing base flow, which increases the natural filtration of the water. Trees also have a really cool phenomenon in rain events that help slow down stormwater. This is called dynamic storage capacity. The interception we talked about earlier is the water storage after a rain event, also called static storage. This is the water that trees keep and never allow to become part of surface runoff, and it was quantified to about 0.2 millimeters of rain per meter square of a tree's leaf area. Leaf area is the projected area of leaves over a unit of land, but it might be easier to think of it as a tree's canopy as a container that will capture rainfall up to a depth of 0.2 millimeters. However, studies have shown that during a rain event, trees actually intercept and store more water than they need. This is called dynamic storage capacity. A study done by Zhao and McPherson quantified the dynamic storage capacity of broadleaf trees to be 0.77 millimeters per meter square of leaf area, and carnivorous trees to be 1.25 millimeters. Trees will hold on to this excess rainfall from anywhere up to 3 hours and slowly drip it out, slowing down the speed of your runoff and allowing more time for biological processes to take place. So this would be an example of a common hackberry, which is a good riparian species tree. In this example, the tree is 50 feet tall with a 14-inch diameter trunk at breast height and has a 35-foot crown spread. Using an online tool called iTreeEco, I calculated the leaf area to be about 650 meters squared. And we take that number into the USGS's rainfall calculator, we find the static storage to be 34 gallons and the dynamic storage to be 132 gallons of water. So in a rain event, this one hackberry tree delays almost 100 gallons of stormwater runoff for up to 3 hours and prevents 34 gallons of water from ever being runoff. This is a side-by-side case study that was done in the North Carolina Piedmont. On the left is a 3 square kilometer forested and open space watershed, and on the right is a growing urban watershed that's less than 1 square kilometer in size. The forest is 1% impervious and the urban area is 44%. These areas are less than 30 miles away from each other just north of Raleigh, North Carolina. As you can see in the urban watershed, the peak flow rate was 13 times higher and the storm flow volume was 11 times greater, which means that stormwater runoff for the same storm was moving 11 times as much water by volume, 13 times faster in an urban watershed as opposed to a forested watershed. And this study was only at a 44% impervious. Generally, when we think of urban landscapes in bigger metro areas, their impervious surfaces are much higher than 44%. Now, when we examine the Dallas-Fort Worth area specifically, we see that it was the fastest growing metro area in the last decade and added more than 1 million citizens in the last 8 years. And to no surprise, it's supposed to be one of the fastest growing of the next decade, which is a good thing, right? Growing population implies opportunity, which implies fundamental desirability. People perceive the Dallas-Fort Worth, North Texas metro area as a great place to live and where they can succeed. Adding people means an expanded workforce. New residents mean new customers for local businesses, which all increases tax revenues that cities can put into roads, schools, and parks. We understand this, and one of the big points I'm trying to impart is that we're not against population growth and urban expansion, but what we are trying to say is that all this growth is possible while maintaining sustainable watershed health. And for that to be true, careful planning is critical. Unplanned rapid urbanization is one of the biggest threats to watershed health. A study done by the Committee on Environment and Public Works in the United States Senate found that an 8% increase in population could correlate to a 41% increase in impervious surfaces. We talked about how impervious surfaces increase your flood impacts and non-point source pollution, but they also put serious strains on the streams themselves. These are pictures of a stream in the W.G. Jones State Forest in Conroe, Texas. The area saw a lot of development in the last half century, particularly around the Jones State Forest, and in turn, this stream has had to take on increased stormwater runoff and higher peak flows than it was naturally carved to intake over hundreds of years. As you can see, the stream bank is eroding, bringing unwanted sediment in the stream, which over time will affect stream flow and degrade water quality for aquatic life. It can even get so bad to negatively impact human health. The EPA maintains a list of impaired water bodies in the United States called a 303D list. Several bayous in the Houston area are so impaired that they have non-contact restrictions on them, meaning if someone were to swim or eat a fish out of one of those bayous, they could get seriously ill. And finally, overloading our streams and increasing the severity of flooding has serious financial impacts specifically to urban areas because they have to rebuild things like cities, businesses, and a lot of infrastructure after a flood. I'm going to keep picking on Houston here because it's where I work, and it really is one of the best examples of negative effects of rapid unplanned urbanization. Houston has no zoning laws. People are able to build pretty much anywhere, including right on the creeks and bayous. And Houston is an area that, due to its geographic location and soil hydrology, was seriously impacted by flooding before paved roads and impervious surfaces were as fundamental as they are today. Of the 10 most costly hurricanes in the history of the United States, Houston has 3 of them, and they all occurred in the last 15 years. Hurricanes Harvey, Ike, and Rita estimate almost $174 billion in damages. So how do we avoid rapid unplanned urbanization? The simple answer is planning. When planning new development projects, it's important to understand how all phases of development will impact stormwater runoff. There are several things to consider to positively impact the watershed through the design, construction, and post-construction phases. For the design phase, consider LID, or low impact development, which is the idea of designing properties to manage stormwater runoff as part of green infrastructure. LID emphasizes conservation and the use of on-site natural features to protect your water quality. This permits water to be treated where it falls, allowing for the natural filtration of the water underground and limits how much it will need to be treated later at a wastewater treatment plant. An example of LID is green or vegetated rooftops. This is where you plant vegetation on the sloping roof to help slow down stormwater, and in some cases have irrigation systems that retain the stormwater in a rain barrel or capture system to be recycled for the building's use. In the construction phase, consider implementing best management practices to protect vegetation and prevent erosion to protect your water quality. Consider minimizing paved surfaces and using alternative materials such as pervious pavement. This type of pavement allows water to seep into the ground, helping infiltration and also limiting the compaction of soils. They also can save construction companies on installation costs because they don't require underground piping, storm drains, or any kind of sloping and grading, and will have a similar life cycle to that of normal pavement. To manage for erosion, make a plan and be precise in where you're disturbing soil, and make sure you're mindful of preserving existing vegetation where possible. Think of it like shaving your sideburns. Once you remove a tree or disrupt a vegetative root system, you can't just put it back. And finally, understanding how the new structure and any subsequent parking lot or paved surfaces are affecting runoff. The water will be draining one way. Is the speed increased, or does it have a new path? There are several best management practices that can help control stormwater, like retention wetlands, detention ponds, infiltration zones, and bioswales that are all effective in managing stormwater before and after development. So here are some of the current projects that are using trees to help protect our stormwater resources in developing areas. This is a quick overview, but we'll talk about each of these in a bit more detail. One way is implementing the use of trees in watershed protection plans. Watershed protection plans integrate the viewpoints of all stakeholders in the watershed to help create solutions that benefit the community and the surrounding environment. Watershed stakeholders write a report on what pollutants are impairing the water body and the solutions to restore and protect the watershed in the future. They then submit that report to the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board or the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which, if approved, help to fund the solutions for long-term watershed protection. The Texas Forest and Drinking Water Partnership was established in 2015. This initiative works to increase understanding and communication between the forest and drinking water sectors, and is part of a larger regional collaborative called the Southeastern Partnership for Forest and Water. The state of Texas is at the forefront of this partnership, working with municipalities, non-government organizations, and private forest landowners to identify and protect forest areas that are critical to surface drinking water resources. And lastly, we talked about implementing BMPs and LID, but just increasing your urban forest canopy as a whole has a myriad of benefits. So this is the watershed protection plan I'm currently working on in the Cypress Creek watershed. Cypress Creek flows directly into Lake Houston, which is one of the largest sources of Houston's drinking water, so improving water quality is imperative here. Throughout my job, I regularly use what's called the iTree suite of tools. These are tools created by the United States Forest Service, free for download, and they accurately simulate all the benefits of trees. They quantify data into residential energy savings, carbon capture, stormwater reduction, and even water quality. For this project, I used a tool called iTree Hydro, which can model how land cover changes impact water quality and quantity. For Cypress Creek, I modeled the benefits of increasing the forest canopy of a 37,000-acre watershed by just 7%, spacing the trees out about 18 feet by 18 feet, and accounted for 409,000 trees over the next 15 years. The addition of these trees estimated an annual reduction of 371 million gallons of stormwater runoff. The key to having serious positive impacts in this model is planting more street trees. Replacing a grass prairie with a forest has benefits, but not one that necessarily justifies the cost of planting and maintenance. From a study conducted by the Water Resources Foundation that did a similar iTree Hydro modeling, they estimated co-benefits of each tree would be around $78 per tree, with a planting cost of $51 per tree. The Texas Water Development Board has split Texas into 16 planning regions, generally based on shared watersheds. The DFW falls into Region C, which includes 16 counties that overlap much of the upper portion of the Trinity River Basin. Region C also includes a smaller part of the Red, Brazos, Sulphur, and Sabine River Basins. And part of the reason that they split these planning groups up is so that they can quantify water needs based on land use and population sizes relevant to each area's watershed and what's called acre feet per year. It's the amount of water needed to fill 1 acre at a depth of 1 foot, and it equates to about 325,851 gallons. In a planning report from 2017, the Texas Water Development Board estimated Region C's water needs to be over 1.7 million acre feet per year starting in 2020, and to be 2.3 million acre feet by 2040. And that's where the Texas Forest and Drinking Water Partnership comes in. It follows the narrative that as populations increase, there's an increased need for clean drinking water, but we don't want to keep taking it out of the ground, so we have to limit subsidence, so there's increased reliance on surface drinking water resources, and because forests provide the cleanest water of any land use, increased need for forest stewardship. Currently, all of the city of Dallas's drinking water is surface water, and by having water suppliers invest in forest stewardship to protect their source water, they can save money on treatment costs, energy bills, and filter media. One way that municipal water suppliers can invest is by creating funds to acquire forested lands for conservation and protecting them from future development. Another is providing incentives to private forest landowners to use best management practices to protect source water upstream. These are some of the benefits of increasing your urban forest cover. We talked about the benefits trees provide for stormwater reduction and water quality, but they also save residents money on their energy bills. According to our most recent data, there are 33 million trees in the city of Houston, and those trees provided over $53 million in residential energy savings. Another benefit is air quality improvements. Trees intake carbon and exude oxygen, providing cleaner air. It also benefits in aesthetics and property value increases. These pictures here are of a subdivision called Mandolin Villages that had a detention pond in the middle of their neighborhood. They decided to renovate this pond into a forested wetland park, complete with trails and fishing areas for recreation. And while the whole subdivision saw a property value increase, some of the homes nearest the park saw over a $300,000 increase to their property's value. And the picture on the right is the same park after Hurricane Harvey, where they discovered because of the added vegetation, the park was actually better suited for flooding protection. Another interest of increasing your urban tree canopy are human health benefits. Studies have shown that trees provide positive impacts to your physical and mental health. They can help boost immune system defenses and pain tolerance thresholds, and can even save money on healthcare costs. Texas A&M Forest Service's Urban and Community Forest Program are part of an initiative called Healthy Trees, Healthy Lives. This program aims to impact individual and community lives by ensuring access to community forests and green spaces. Our urban and community foresters foster relationships with local governments and healthcare providers to understand and apply the interrelationship between urban forests and public health. So when increasing your urban forest canopy, you don't want to just plant trees for the sake of planting trees. It's about planting the right tree species in the right place with the right amount of growing space to maximize their ecosystem benefits. So in conclusion, the takeaway should be that trees provide a number of benefits to urban watersheds, including positive impacts to water quality and flood mitigation. Abundant impervious surfaces and storm drain infrastructure increase your peak flows of stormwater runoff and rapidly carry non-point source pollution unfiltered into our waterways. And understanding and planning for how stormwater runoff will be impacted by future development is critical to sustaining long-term watershed health while still fostering that population growth. These are some resources. The Forest and Drinking Water Story Map combines geospatial data with photos, videos, and text to help better convey the relationship of drinking water and forest in Texas. The Forest and Drinking Water Partnership also has a video series consisting of 6 short videos that outline everything from the relationship of forest and water to municipality and landowner success stories. If you want to learn more about the health benefits of trees, this is the Healthy Trees, Healthy Lives website. Next is the homepage for the Southeastern Partnership for Forest and Drinking Water, and it has all the data and presentations from participating states dating back to 2015. And finally, like I mentioned, the iTree suite of tools, they're very intuitive and free for download, and they can help quantify the benefits of trees into those ecosystem values.
Thank you, Matt, for that great presentation. And we have one question. It is, what was the name of the website you used to calculate the hackberry storage and runoff? Was that the iTree website, or was it something else?
It's iTree. It's one of their tools called iTree Eco. And I did say USGS. I can see the chat here. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Mac, for your great presentation, and we will keep moving ahead for our next speaker, which is Susan Alvarez, Assistant Director of the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability for the City of Dallas. Susan holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering with a minor in Geology from Rice University and postgraduate work in water resources. She is a registered professional engineer in Texas and 5 other Western states, and is also a certified floodplain manager and master naturalist in Texas. She is currently responsible for the development of the city's comprehensive environmental and climate action plan under the Paris Agreement, efforts towards environmental outreach and engagement, urban agriculture, city environmental management, and the Urban Forest Master Plan. So Susan, we will now transfer controls over to you, and you may begin. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So Mac did a great overview of why we look at trees and why they're so very important in an urban watershed. I'm going to share some of the work that we've been doing in the city of Dallas relative to climate change and kind of the nexus between trees and stormwater in that realm. Go forward. So this is kind of a short, sweet list of what's in about a 500-page document that the National Climate Assessment put out. Texas and Dallas is in the Southern Great Plains region, and the National Climate Assessment that was completed in 2018 indicates we're looking at extreme heat. We're looking at a lot more extreme heat. We're looking at poorer air quality that is a function of that increasing heat. And then what really drew me into the climate world is the vacillation between flooding and drought. And this kind of goes back to 2015 when we first started talking about this. This is a map of Texas. We were in level 3 drought. We were under significant water restrictions. A month later, we had our annual rainfall in about a month. And all 4 of the reservoirs upstream of Dallas were in uncontrolled overflow. Those of you that know me know that I spent that month down in our emergency operations center. And this was kind of a heads up to all of the hydrologists because this system had never been modeled with all 4 of those reservoirs in uncontrolled overflow. It was considered until that time to be statistically not probable. Statistics don't always tell the whole story, though. So we started looking at that. We're not the only ones looking at that. This is from the state report following Hurricane Harvey. And this is the percent of flood losses located outside of the regulated Texas floodplain. And you can see a nice increase in that. What is concerning is this is flooding in places that we didn't think it flooded. Some of the other things that we're looking at is the National Weather Service tracks billion-dollar-plus disasters. This is a place where Texas is #1, and I'm not sure we really want to be. I also know that we lead in all of the categories of disasters that they track data for. One other thing that we're looking at is people are saying, well, you need to make a business case for addressing climate change. Well, these are billion-dollar plus disasters, and you can see visually without even doing the statistics that there's an increase. The green is severe storms, blue is the increase in flooding, and you can see over the last 2 or 3 years, we've spent about $300 billion a year nationally on billion-dollar disasters. So about a little over a year ago, we started working on a comprehensive environmental climate action plan. It was just passed unanimously about a couple of weeks ago, May 27th. And we looked at a bunch of things. We started, like most cities do, looking at our greenhouse gas emissions. Majority are in 3 different areas: buildings and energy and transportation. That said, when we started looking at the approach to how do we fix that, we looked in 3 different primary areas. We looked at mitigation, which is reducing those emissions. We looked at adaptation, which is how do we manage the risk of climate change? How do we protect our areas from flooding? And then last but certainly not least, as we started looking at mitigation and adaptation, we kept coming up with elements that are in a 3rd realm, which is environmental quality. And what we also found was that trees were involved with all 3 of those major categories of actions. And so as we looked at environmental justice, mitigation, adaptation, we kept coming back to trees. So overall, our plan has 8 different areas. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them today. I'll do a little bit in our water resources realm, a lot in our ecosystems realm. But one of the other things that we looked at the general primary benefits, but we looked at co-benefits, which is things that you get if you do it that you weren't necessarily doing that thing for. For instance, if we plant trees, we're trying to cool down the air, but we're also affecting the hydrology. We're also affecting quality of life. These are the first 4, and these primarily tackle issues related to the emissions side of the house. The other 4 goals and objectives address the environmental side of the house. Just about everything that we do in this plan affects the clean air section. And so it's kind of a catch-all, but it is not any less important than anything else. So under goal 5, that's our primary water resources goal. We're looking at conserving and protecting water resources, protecting neighborhoods, and basically trying to be a leader relative to water resilience. Our Dallas Water Utilities division has the lead in this, and they already have a whole lot of plans under play towards some of these goals. Why it matters. So here's kind of our low-income areas are in this slash blocks. Parks and recreation is green, obviously, but we also have a lot of flooding. I would go back, though, and remind you of that graph from the Rebuild Texas report that shows that we have flooding in areas that aren't mapped as having flooding. And so we're really worried about an increase of kind of vacillating between drought and then significant storms. And we had 2 or 3 of those storms just even in the last year. So one of the first things we did internally was updated our trustee drainage manual. The city of Dallas has been one of the founding cities working with COG to develop the integrated stormwater management criteria, which is the local version of low impact design. We originally adopted ISWIM on a voluntary basis back in 2009. What we found, though, is that our engineers really love this trustee guide from 1993, that when we talked with some of our senior drainage engineers, confessed that it was actually 1978's criteria with a new cover. So we recently incorporated ISWIM into the standard design process, and that's for both paving and drainage. And we updated that guidance. It is available on our website. The one thing I will tell you is that it still says that low impact design is, I think the word is encouraged. It was supposed to be required, consistent with CRS requirements, and we'll be working on that change shortly. One of the other things that we have done is the city of Dallas has a higher standard policy where we require additional freeboard over the flood elevations just to give us a little bit of more room so that few of our properties are impacted by flooding. Unfortunately, we go to a maximum of 3 feet above the base flood elevation. And some of the studies on this nationally show that we should probably be looking at 4 or 5 feet. Not sure how we're going to look at that moving forward. However, we also understand that as we look at green infrastructure, that may give us a little bit of a factor of safety on some of these other larger events. So we have probably 20 some odd different actions under the water resources goal. The ones that are circled in green are ones that we're currently working on already. A lot of these are related to doing some citywide, systems-wide, basically capital flood management planning in support of developing a capital drainage plan. This is the other piece of it. And you'll notice here on this one that we're looking at drought-tolerant plants, native vegetation, and implementing water quality projects in addition to our flood conveyance projects. This is Mac and Matt's likely most favorite section of our climate plan, and that is to really look at leveraging green space relative to climate adaptation benefits. We're looking to increase the amount of green area. We're looking at integrating nature-based solutions on a much greater basis as part of a global public health strategy in Dallas. This is a map that was done by our friends in the Trust for Public Land. If you go to their website and look at Smart Growth for Dallas, it's a series of GIS coverages that are extremely helpful towards planning in Dallas. This is actually the heat island map and shows where we have a large percentage of the area that does not have an effective canopy, and it is being used to help us identify areas where we should focus future planting efforts. And again, if you notice, the red from that last map coincides with a 0 to 15% canopy on this map. We're looking at this because we do not have green space where a lot of people really use it. And we have about 60% of our residents that don't have access or easy access to a park. And so we're looking at trying to increase the amount of canopy that we have in Dallas for all of the measures that Matt talked about as far as why you need more trees. It does help with our watershed management. It does help with our urban canopy. And it does help with both our air quality and our heat island impacts that drive some of the other climate-related issues that we anticipate. So, and I realize this has a lot of font that's really small, and I apologize for that. But the two places that we're already working, and one is to increase our tree canopy and working with our friends and partners at the Texas Trees Foundation towards completing an urban forest master plan. And then we're also looking, and we work with Texas Trees and several other organizations towards trying to promote tree planting efforts across Dallas, both on public property and also on private property. Each fall we do Branch Out Dallas, which is an effort by the city to give away saplings to property owners that would like to add trees to their property. These are all, for the most part, Texas native trees that will do pretty well now once they're established. So, as I said earlier, all of our goals in our climate plan focus on helping improve our local air quality. Most of the different goals and actions have multiple co-benefits. And as you notice on we call them cross-cutting objectives. For air quality, we're looking closer to a neighborhood level air quality. The map on the right is adult asthma. Unfortunately, there's a real similar map that correlates childhood asthma communities with low income. And that's really what's driving all of the work that we're doing in our climate plan is that equity element. So if you want a great summer read, the finished climate plan is at dallasclimateaction.com. We are in the process of developing a stakeholder committee to help advise our Environment and Sustainability Committee on implementation of the plan. I would say stay posted on that because we do not have that completely figured out yet. It's something we're working on. And with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Susan, for that great presentation. And then we have a question, Susan. What is the source of the asthma data map?
I'm pretty sure it's from the county hospital district, but I can look that up and get back with you on that.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. So thank you, Susan, and we will keep moving forward with our third speaker. I would like to introduce Matt Grubisich. Matt has been transforming landscapes across Texas for the past 20 years. In his current position as Director of Operations and Urban Forestry for the Texas Trees Foundation, he combines his passion for urban forestry with his desire to create more livable, healthy communities. He has worked with communities across Texas providing urban forestry assessments, detailing the functional, structural, and associated values of our urban trees. Matt has been able to leverage these economic and environmental values to successfully change policy, resulting in higher standards for developers to create more sustainable developments. He is a degreed forester, certified arborist, certified forester, and has served in a leadership role on numerous local and state boards and commissions. Matt is also very active in his community, having served 3 terms on the Rowlett Parks and Recreation Board and is currently the Deputy Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Rowlett, Texas. So thank you, Matt, and we will now turn over controls to you, and you may begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena, and good job pronouncing my name. That was very good for a first try. Welcome everybody, and thank you, Mac and Susan, for great presentations and setting up the third one here. I'm going to kind of dive down. They hit a lot of high-level things, and Susan did a great job of focusing on what is happening in the city of Dallas. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some BMPs and also then look at some case studies, because Mac mentioned it earlier. If we're not making the economic decision and we're not answering that question about what the benefits are for trees in an economic sense, and it's going to be hard to move trees forward and green infrastructure and low impact development forward, because it has to make economic sense at the end of the day. Before I start, I want to give a special thanks to Stephen Spears. He's a landscape architect. He used to work for Design Workshop and did some work for us within the Southwest Medical District, which I'm going to talk to you about towards the end of this presentation. And some of these slides are from some of his presentations that he gave while working on those programs, but very, very informational. If you're not familiar with who the Texas Trees Foundation is, we were founded in 1982, and we were designed to create healthy communities through tree planting education and advocacy here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Oh, there's a slide missing. That's all right. There it is. But what we do, we work more than just in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We do projects across the state. And what we do is we work with communities to help them evaluate what their tree canopy cover is and to set goals and develop plans on how to manage it going forward. And what I'm going to talk about today, especially as we're talking about stormwater management, and again, Mac talked about this, if we're not planting, it's gone beyond just planting trees in the right way, in the right place, and making sure that we have the space for them, and we're looking at all that. If we're really going to move the needle in terms of how we use trees and green infrastructure for stormwater management, urban heat island reduction, and creating healthy, resilient communities moving forward, we need to really be able to focus on how we can make trees interact with our other infrastructure, our gray infrastructure, and have them work and have them work together. And what better place that we can do that is in our streets. And it's easy to be able to look at that we have an aging infrastructure in this country. The American Society of Civil Engineers ranked infrastructure as a D+ with an investment of nearly $3.6 trillion that needed to be put into it to be able to repair it. We see infrastructure fail because of heat. We see infrastructure fail because of flooding. And, you know, we can look at that infrastructure issue as a problem, which it is, but we can also look at it as a potential solution for the issues that we have facing us. It gives us a chance to be able to redesign our cities. Cities take out billions of dollars in bond elections across the country, and most of it goes to street repair. In most communities, the largest amount of public space and public is within our public right-of-ways in most of our communities. In Dallas, 38% of all public space is within our right-of-ways. But yet a lot of our right-of-ways lack sidewalks, they lack adequate areas for public use. It takes water and drains it off into sewers and culverts and then moves it faster and faster down the system. So it's how do we start to how do we start to rethink our streets, and how do we start to rethink parking lots, and how do we start to rethink how we design our cities as we rebuild them? Because we do have, and then not only rebuild the stuff that we are doing, but as we continue to grow to design them in a different way. So how do we start to think of our streets and our public spaces as we become more and more urbanized in a more complete and smart way? And we need to do that in a couple of different ways. And one of them is increasing the amount of pervious area that you have there. The more impervious surface area that you have, and you heard Mac talk about this earlier, it leads to larger amounts of stormwater runoff. It increases the urban heat island effect. So how do we increase that amount of pervious space to be able to make more room for things like trees and other types of water mitigation types of strategies besides just running it into the nearest storm drain? But there comes an issue, and if we have engineers or architects, you know, this is why everybody calls me and says we can't do this, and that's because trees interfere with that. Because trees do need certain things to grow. They're living, breathing organisms. They need proper soil volume. They need water. They need nutrients. Trees need on average about 20 cubic feet of soil volume for every 1 foot of crown diameter. So you imagine a 40-foot canopy tree needs roughly 800 cubic feet of soil. That's a lot of room. That's a lot of space. And you have to compete with a lot of other things within that infrastructure. So how do we start to think outside the box? How do we start to use other types of materials that are on the market now, like structural soils and things like civil cells and suspended pavement types of material, where it allows you to not have to compact the soil substrate underneath the sidewalk or the street or the parking lot to such a degree that the tree roots won't physically grow, but still be able to get the support that you need for vehicle and traffic. And yeah, there's some extra cost here, but if we're not spending it on the upfront within this development and how we redesign our streets and our parking lots, we're going to spend it on the back end as we start to have to clean up or retrofit these sites. And I'm going to show you some examples as we move through. So it's how do we start to redesign these right-of-way spaces and to be able to handle all of the different type of infrastructure needs that are there, and making sure that we maintain and leave the type of room that is needed for trees and plants to be able to flourish and grow and maximize the benefits that they can provide. And this can be done. And then the other way is, how do you increase the permeability of even the hardscape that you're going to have? So using things like porous concrete or permeable pavers, or designing the water flow around that site that it's flowing into these areas where you can capture the stormwater. And if you are creating that soil volume that is not compact, now you can use that soil volume as a way to be able to capture and hold stormwater and release it slowly back into the system. So not only do you have the tree that's capturing and holding the water that Mac talked about earlier, but now you have the entire, even in a heavily dense urbanized area, you have the soil volume that that tree requires to grow, capturing and holding that storm water as well, and then releasing that slowly back into the system. And if you do this over a large enough size, you can dramatically decrease the amount of issues that you have with stormwater runoff, water quality when it is coming off, and cutting down on things like flash flooding. And why is this so important? And so here's kind of the first case study is City of Philadelphia. And the City of Philadelphia was facing a really big problem because they're an older city, Northeast, and they had their sewers and their stormwater systems are combined. It's called combined storm sewer system. And luckily in Texas, we don't have that problem. We were smart by the time we got here and we divided those systems. But in Philly, they didn't. So every time it rained and they had flash flooding, as the city continued to grow, you can imagine the mess that they had. And this was a $9.6 billion fix if they were going to fix it with all traditional piping and gray infrastructure. And they had a very astute mayor at the time that says, well, one, we don't have $9.6 billion to fix this problem. There's got to be a better way. And so they embarked on a very ambitious 25-year program to invest in the neighborhood of $2.1 billion in green infrastructure. And they do this through tax abatements. They do this through incentive programs. They do this through partnerships to be able to convert traditional gray infrastructure into green infrastructure, plant a whole bunch of trees. And they're now 9 years roughly into this 25-year program. And what they're starting to find as you go through this is, one, they're finding an economic impact of over $4 billion. They're seeing a creation of jobs. They're seeing not only are they meeting what their stormwater needs are, they're anticipating that they're going to be able to reduce the amount of stormwater that it was running off their sites by as much as 84%. And so just by thinking, again, how do we incorporate green? How do we incorporate trees, and getting away from the traditional way that we manage stormwater within a city, even on a very, very large scale, you can have dramatic impacts, not only on stormwater management, but also on economic growth. And that's something that we're using as a model on a project that we're working on here in Dallas within the Southwest Medical District. And we have been working very closely for the last 4 or 5 years with the 4 major hospitals, and how do we redesign the public spaces throughout the entire Southwest Medical District. The Southwest Medical District is situated just north of downtown and just south of Love Field. It's a very, very urban area, under 7% tree canopy cover in this area, one of the highest urban heat islands in the Dallas area. There's over 80,000 visitors a day that either come to or travel through the Southwest Medical District. So it's a very complex place, but it's a place where you can make a maximum amount of impact very, very quickly. And we've done a lot of analysis and design over the years, past few years, and one of the things we looked at was stormwater management. There's miles and miles of missing sidewalk. There's areas where stormwater puddles. There's areas where it pools. There's not good drainage. And so what we are doing is right now in the design phase to completely redesign the public space along Harry Hines. And that project is just starting design right now. And we're going to design that to help manage stormwater, to help manage vehicle traffic, to help manage pedestrian traffic, and make Harry Hines in that area be a place that connects the medical district together and not be a space that's dividing the medical district as it kind of does now. And as this builds out and create the best management practices and the street designs, that as the district continues to grow out and redevelop, that they'll be able to use that the model that we're producing here and designing here on all of the secondary streets and the ancillary streets, so that this becomes an area that can be a model across the country of how do you successfully incorporate green infrastructure, people, lots and lots of people, in stormwater management in an effective way. Like I said, we're just now in the design process, so this is a kind of a reimagined cross section of what Harry Hines, and if anybody that's on this webinar has driven down Harry Hines, you know how fast the traffic is on Harry Hines. You know how dangerous it is if you're trying to cross the street. So how do you reimagine it where it's more pedestrian friendly, it's bike friendly, it has different various types of mobile transportation, easy to get from one area to another, and obviously has a high increased number of pervious surfaces, tree canopy cover to be able to manage the stormwater in the urban heat island that exasperates that area currently. And I want to give you, so that's a project that's in the works. So I want to also talk to you about a project I'm sure Mac knows really well. And this was a project that was done and it is complete in Houston on a street called Bagby Street. And this was in the Midtown area. It was located south of downtown. This was in an emerging mixed use district, cultural arts and entertainment area that received some funding through tax from a TERS or a tax increment refinance zone. And it was also an area that flooded a lot every time that it flooded. And so they worked really hard and had to push really hard. And when they decided to redo Bagby Street, to do it in a different way and to throw the old way out and to reject the way that they've been doing streets in the past and to reimagine that site so that it was more pedestrian friendly, that it helped to meet stormwater management, and it was going to be built to bring people to the area. And so that's what they did. And what they increased, they reduced the size of the traffic lanes. They increased the area for pedestrian use by 88%. They decreased the hardscape by 14%. And they increased the number of trees. They increased the amount of live plants. Into when those trees are fully grown out, they'll have almost 42% canopy cover in the area, which is unheard of in a large urban area like that. So again, it's just reimagining how we design our streets, and that you don't need these wide lanes, and that you can use more of that right away for things like trees and space and things like that, and still not mess with traffic flow issues. And what they saw was amazing. And so this is that economic piece of it. What they saw when they redesigned, even though it was more expensive and they had to fight for those dollars as they redeveloped the street, what they found was $40 million in reinvestment and private redevelopment investment into this area. They saw a 20% increase in rental rates. They saw a 14% increase in rental prices in that area. So they have more than paid for this project over and over again since the project has been completed. They included more space for people to sit and linger, which attracts more businesses. They use native plants. They even put in lots and lots of educational opportunities to be able to teach people about what this site does. And I've even heard from people in Houston that even during Hurricane Harvey, that within the whole area around here flooded, but Bagby Street did not flood because of the water retention area measures that they put onto this street. Similar to this. So again, 33% of the capturing of the local stormwater, reducing of bacteria, phosphorus, and other types of suspended solids that run off of our streets and roads when we get those flash flooding events. And so again, we have to make those economic cases. And so here's a couple of cases from across the United States. So you see a 22% increase in lease rates off the $55 million investment. In Denver, they had 16% increase in sales tax in the first year, more than doubled the rate of increase in both the city and the entire Dallas metro area. In Miami, the Lincoln Road project was an 85% increase in the total assessed value of properties. There's a project called Uptown Streetscapes in Illinois, where they saw an increased revenue of $680,000 just into the conference center alone. And then South Grand Boulevard, which I had a chance to visit last year when I was heading back to Chicago and St. Louis, where they saw a 14% increase in sales tax after the first year, when the projections going into the project were a 19% increase over 10 years. So, you know, as we move into a more and more virtual world, people want to go to where they're going to have experiences, where they want to be in, when you can invite an area that is more of a almost park-like setting to where they're going to go and visit to either go out to dinner or to shop. that's what's going to draw people. And the numbers show that if you invest that, not only are you going to get the economic impact, but you're also going to get the stormwater value impact, which has to be paid for eventually, whether you're capturing it on the upfront or you're having to build the retention and the larger infrastructure to be able to handle that that stormwater as it continues to grow. And we understand at the Texas Trees Foundation that, you know, it's hard to manage your urban forest if you don't know what you have. And, you know, that was one of the things that's lacking in the Dallas-Fort Worth areas. People don't know, you know, how much tree canopy cover they have. What's the best place we need to plant trees? Where do we need to maybe manage it in a different way? And so what we did with several different partners is we started mapping out the tree canopy cover for Collin County, Dallas County, Tarrant County, and Denton County. So the 4 most populated counties in DFW. And so we now have up-to-date tree canopy cover by cities for both Collin County and Dallas County. We're getting ready to start Tarrant County next month. And then next year we'll do Denton. So we will have very, very good canopy cover data for cities to be able to access and use, so that you can start to see what the canopy cover is in your city and be able to use that to strategically set plans for how you want to manage your urban tree canopy cover in your cities. And we're actually going to be hosting a webinar 2 weeks from today with our partners at Planet Geo to talk about this data, talk about how you can use it, talk about how you can get in touch with us to be able to get that data, and also share when new data is going to be coming up. So we would love it if you want to attend that to learn more about what this data is, how you can use it, how you can get your hands on it, because we are making this data available to those municipalities for free. We would love for you to join that so that we can get that conversation going, so that cities can start to learn how do we best manage our urban forest, not just for stormwater management, but for all of the benefits that trees provide. But you got to have, you have to know what you have before you can start to put those plans in the process. So thank you so much for your time and listening to us. And I think we hit your time.
Yes, great job, Matt. You couldn't have planned it any better. And that's great information. Thank you so much. Okay, I will wrap up then. And thank you again to all who joined us today, and many, many thanks to our knowledgeable presenters for taking time to share your information today. We really appreciate it. And this webinar is now over.